Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Race Analysis with TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee, and this time I'm joined by a slightly different cast. We have our head coach, Chad Timmerman.
Hello.
Our filmmaker, Dave Christensen.
Hi, guys.
And we are going to analyze another race with onboard footage and our performance analytics tools today. This time it's a team time trial, something a little different. Dave, you are one of the riders in the team that we're following. Chad, you aren't, but you have experience on this course, experience in team time trials, and you're also Coach Chad. So we're going to dig into this and try to understand how to become faster time trialists, but specifically team time trialists. Chad, can you explain the Cold Springs time trial a little bit, this course?
Yeah, it's just a little north of Reno. It's a short loop. It's a little over 7 miles. Basically flat, a couple fast turns. The only thing that isn't flat are a couple freeway overpasses. Mm-hmm. So, and they're the first one's a bit drawn out. It takes you a little while to get up to it. Second one comes a little quicker. And then I just 2 hard right-hand turns and then 1 sweeping bend and pretty non-technical. I
think one thing that I think of when I think of this course is crosswinds. It seems like
highly subject to winds for sure.
Mm-hmm. You're at the base of a huge mountain right there, right?
Yeah, it seems like when you start, you're kind of starting into a headwind, and then as you turn and make your way around this, you go around that big lake out there, like kind of a mud puddle. But as you turn, the way the wind affects you changes.
Yeah.
So
you're kind of always subject, I think, like you were saying, they're always subject to wind in some regard.
There's never been a low wind day out there that I've been privy to.
Which also it becomes a little bit more complex when you're talking, when you're riding alone, it's one thing, but then when you're riding with others in the aero position, that gets a little complex. So we'll get into that. Just to give you some, and we'll get into the data as well. I think it's probably best with this one if we just start out. So I guess with that, let's go ahead and start the footage. This case, Dave, we have kind of a composite team, right? Can you describe your team members that we see here on camera?
Yeah, so the guy right here behind me is Josh Rennie. He's a pretty good time trialist, and I've probably done more team time trials with Josh than any other rider. So I've probably done maybe 8 of these, maybe 9 team time trials with Josh.
He's got a pretty slippery position, it looks like.
Yeah, and quite arrow, yeah.
And then behind him in the red is Zach Yeager. He's a strong local rider.
He's a triathlete, didn't he?
I think he's mostly triathlon, but I think he's getting more into road racing. And then the guy that's behind Zach is Kurt Bickle. I think Kurt is almost 60 years old.
It's impressive.
He's got some real time trial credentials too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The thing with Kurt though is he broke his heel off. Not much, he's healing up now. So he kind of knew that this was going to be a tough day because he's coming off of a really bad injury.
He's got a narrow elbow position. Look at that. Yeah, he's pretty optimized looking too. So I noticed that the majority of you guys, I think everyone here is on a disc wheel too, which is I guess that as we've learned through a lot of our deep diving into time trials, which you guys can look in the description below for some of the content that we produced there on time trials. But discs kind of have like a point of diminishing returns in terms of if you go slow, they actually in many cases can actually be slower. But with the team time trial, you usually carry a higher than average speed than you would if you were just doing a normal time trial, right?
I think the thing on this course that makes the disc beneficial is when you get to that backside, when you kind of have a cross tailwind, and then it acts as a sail. It's it's
a rocket ride back there with the disc. Yeah.
So another thing that I noticed there is that you guys started out. I guess how should you start out a team time trial? Should it be something that you start out pretty hard?
No, you go off really easy, actually. Not like I would probably sprint off the line a little harder in a regular TT, like a solo time trial. But you want to make sure that everybody gets in there and gets in the draft and gets up to speed together because any wasted energy it's just bad.
Yeah, and you can blow up your entire team if just one person goes out too hard. Whoever's on the front is going to dictate the speed, and if that person's really hitting it, everyone pays the price.
You'll see on this one that we have the data in kilometers an hour, both of them, and so you can run through that to give you an idea of like the basic stuff. You'll see that in a section they'll be going around 54 kilometers an hour. That's like 37 miles an hour, just under 40. Right now, where they're going in the mid to high 20s right now. So you can see, looks like Kurt's
already done.
He's hurting.
He's already told me to come back through. And
I'm out.
And I've just rolled off and done a turn and closing that down. I mean, it wasn't that hard, but that's like those little bits of wasted energy right there that can add up.
So let's say that you're in Kurt's position. So, I mean, he's coming back from an injury. He figured he wouldn't be able to last the whole time, and we'll get into how to hold a team together and everything later on. But what should you do if you're the rider that can't hold on? What's the best case scenario on how to retire? Like, do you tell people? Where do you pull off?
Communication in team time trials is pretty difficult, especially if it's windy. I mean, we already have helmets that don't lend themselves to hearing very well. The wind on top of the helmets makes it even worse, and then there's noise. In the case of this course, we're right along the freeway, so you have to be loud, and you have to be really short and clear with your statements. No full sentences. You're not going to hear anything but maybe that first word, and just wonder what they're talking about. So really quick, clipped, loud statements.
And then as far as like pulling off, if you're the rider that feels like you're going to blow up.
In the case of, I think what Kurt probably did is took one last long, strong pull. And what long and strong are may not really have been all that helpful. I don't know what sort of shape he's in right now, and he's obviously battling an injury, which doesn't help at all.
Yeah. So it looks like, and it's interesting when I'm seeing you guys pulling back through, it looks like you stay pretty close to each other too. You're not doing the dramatic.
You can see we're echeloned right out too. I mean, we're using that whole lane because the wind is kind of a cross headwind from our left, like from right or left. And this section's really, you're just getting buffeted by the wind the whole time on this section. It's really, there's even points where, like right there, I almost went into Josh's wheel.
Did you guys pre-establish the duration of your pulls? How long are you each going to pull?
We said 30 seconds at first, and then if it needs to change on the road, then we change it on the road.
Yeah, it seems like I see a lot of the top team time trial teams usually rotating somewhere around 30 seconds. So another thing that I noticed on this is, I mean, and for those that don't know this, I'm sure most of you do, but you don't have brakes, obviously, in this position. When you're in a group like this, do you position yourself differently or change anything in terms of how you ride, since you don't have any access whatsoever to the brakes, when you're in a group like this?
I find that when you're really close on a TT bike like this, it actually helps to look further forward than at the person's wheel, because you start to get a little, too concerned with what's right in front of you. And it's not that you're going to hit something in the road, but I find that it makes you a little more wobbly. If you're like,
little too twitchy. Yeah, you're trying to over-manage the situation.
Maybe it's like that slight lack of relative control that you have over the bike compared to a normal one that, really makes those twitches even more profound. Yeah, that could make sense. Now you're at the turn. It's about to get fast, right?
We just went up a slight drag climb. It's not
Which actually brings up a good point we were talking about earlier, is that Josh is having maybe not his best day, and Dave's kind of beating him up. So Dave's poles are kind of tailing Josh off. So they made the call, I don't know if they did on this lap or that first lap, that Josh leads the climbs, so that they wouldn't risk blowing him up.
So the stronger rider is not the one that's leading up the climbs.
Right. You need to go, you're kind of stuck. You're like, if you're the strong guy in this, then you can only go as fast as your teammates can go. So
to an extent, at some point, once you've determined kind of the pecking order, who's having the better day, who's just in better form at that time, then you start to determine, who's going to take the longer pulls, who's going to pull into the wind, who's going to, in the case of the climbs, who's going to lead the climbs, that sort of thing.
Well, that was a hard.
Yeah, just to get back on the wheel, it's like.
So would you say that Josh probably pulled through a little too hard there? Or was it just that you pulled off?
I think it's because we're going so fast here. I mean, we're up at 57, 58 kilometers an hour. It's just the way.
It gets a little tricky. I mean, just like you mentioned, your hands aren't on the brakes, so you have to do all of this by, either slipping out into the wind, just letting off the gas a little bit. And when you're doing it at 45, 50 miles an hour, or maybe not quite that fast, but, 40 miles an hour, it gets pretty unnerving. Yeah,
so you went off there, and then you had to work really hard to get back on. Now you're probably hoping to recover behind your teammate, behind Zach.
There's no real recovery in a team time trial.
It's something that I find interesting too is when you look like it at the height difference. How do you figure that into a team time trial? Zach is pretty tall and he's more upright in his position, probably from the triathlon side of things. Josh is pretty slippery, but then you're much smaller than either of them. Did you guys use that to establish an order?
Yeah, I mean, basically the best draft for Zach was behind Josh, so that's the way it went. But Zach, you can see, is really tall on his bike. He does have more of a triathlete's position on his TT bike.
Yeah, and you can see that he's even kind of holding a distant wheel here. I'm not sure if it's the fatigue or what's going on.
It's tough. I mean, these guys had to slap this team together, so they have no real cohesion. They haven't had any practice. They don't know, again, what each other's fitness is, how each other rides. There's a trust issue too. I mean, you have to be pretty familiar with the rider or just blindly trust that the rider's going to do the right things so that you can hold that wheel closely. And I think Zach's he's still coming to terms with, what that's like and who he can trust and just being a little sketchy when things don't go. I mean, being buffeted by the wind, the crosswinds, this course is open to traffic. There are other teams on the course. Gets pretty tricky.
So it looks like Zach just filled in.
Yeah, that's the thing. And you can see the way our shadows are falling. I noticed it by where his shadow was that he wasn't going to come through. Yeah. So I didn't even look back. I just saw his shadow wasn't, that there was a gap, and I just went right into it.
And he skipped that pole because it was too fast for him to be able to move through that rotation and toward the front. He would have probably slowed you guys down had he done that, right? Like he would have altered the pace of the group to such a degree that it's not beneficial.
If he's a vital rider, in the case they started with 4, so I think they take time on the third rider. So they have to, all 3 of them have to finish. So it's definitely in their best interest to stay together now. Yeah. So if you start to come on hits, you start to slip off the back of the group, it's your job to call off, to yell and let them know they need to ease up a little bit so you can get back on. Otherwise, you burn yourself up trying to grasp the end of it.
Makes sense.
But I think we actually thought that Kurt, because here we're losing Zach, and we thought since Kurt was only gonna last a bit, and I thought maybe Rich would just let us roll into
finish with 2.
So we lose Zach here. Zach's super strong. I think like Chad was just saying, it's just he probably burned a lot just not being comfortable.
We watched it happen. Yeah, he did a lot of extra work there. And you're already going, just on the rivets, riding as hard as you can. Yeah. Even when you're in the draft, there's no real relaxation. It's not like you're in this big field where you can hide from the wind. You're still working very close to threshold, even in the draft.
Yeah, looking at this, Dave, when you're reattaching, you're surging up to 400, then you're settling in, even in the draft, 250. And a lot of times is like kind of where you're hovering. Yeah. Your poles are around like 320 is where you're so it's a hard effort, right? Yeah. Compared to like that normal time trial, it's kind of a different fitness profile, right? That you need for a team time trial.
It's basically, in this case, 30 minutes of over-unders. You're just a little under threshold, a little over threshold. In some cases, like the hill, we didn't really home in on that when that first lap through, but Josh was putting out 450 watts just to stay on Dave's wheel. Yeah. So that's obviously well above threshold.
Yeah, that's gonna hurt him later on for sure, right?
Yeah. As we lost Zach, when Josh rolled around me to do this turn, he told me, he said, "We just lost Zach. Do you want to wait?" And I said, "No." I just said, "Just go."
Yeah, right. That makes sense. Now, when Zach was behind you and he was getting tailed off, did you think to like posture up at all, or do you ever think of doing that to help out a teammate?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think it's better to just ease up rather than if you're in contact with that front rider, then everything works a little bit better. But if Dave can't get to Josh and let him know that he needs to ease up, it puts Dave in a really tough position.
I think in another situation, say you were losing a rider that was really strong, but for whatever reason, maybe he took a corner bad and got a big gap. If I was that rider who I knew I was feeling strong, I would yell as loud as I could.
Absolutely.
Like, ease up. Let me back
if you know you're still a contributor, then it's definitely within your rights to expect them to ease off the gas a bit.
So I'm looking at this and I see that Josh is pretty detailed about his aero setup, but he doesn't have shoe covers on in this case.
I didn't wear them either. I think we both just figured this is a team time trial. It was 95 degrees this day too, so we were both not. You're already putting an oven on your head with those TT helmets. So.
Right. Is that something that would you change up your equipment perhaps at all for a team time trial? I guess thinking about it, since you're in the draft, maybe something like shoe covers may not be quite as important. I don't know.
I think I've actually seen some World Tour teams not wear shoe covers in the Triple T.
Yeah, the U.S. National Championships just took place, the elite or the pro time trial. And I think you noticed, Dave, about half the riders weren't wearing shoe covers. So the jury's definitely out.
Yeah, I don't know how much, but I do notice when you're watching the individual time trial at the World Tour level, I would say 99% of the riders
have shoe covers.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting is the road's starting to kick up maybe just a bit here. It's flat-ish, but you're getting close to a second overpass, right? Which is that tight 90 degree that you can see on the course. As you'll go up this, something that's interesting is take a look at Dave's watts. It's starting to tip up. Dave's watts versus Josh's watts, and you'll see that Josh still has to work very hard going up this hill just due to the extra weight, right? You're darn near at the same wattage, right? And he's over in some cases.
Yeah, this is like probably the slowest part too. This hill's the one that, and I think around now is when Josh told me I was killing him. And,
yes, yeah. Ideally, you get to choose your team. Well, there's a little more interaction prior, so roughly if you have a team of 8 riders, then you're going to choose the guys who work best together, or those riders who work best together. This is not how this worked out. So there are big differences in fitness levels and capabilities, and that is really hard to work with.
So you're coming into a sharp turn now.
Yeah, it's like a little downhill corner.
Did you get out of position in this case? You could probably roll it in position.
I did get out of position just because that's another aspect of team time trialing. You don't want to rail those corners. You actually, if you're the guy on the front or a girl on the front, you want to roll into that corner fast, but you don't want to get up to like speed super quick again. You want to roll that speed back up slowly, and you can even take a look back and make sure that all your riders are in, and even get a confirmation.
It's also a really good time to pull through. So in that case, maybe Dave swings off and lets Josh dictate the speed of the turn. So they lose a little bit of speed, but they get their interchange in a place that's already pretty tricky to stay together anyways. Same thing with an uphill turn, or really any turn. It's a good time to pull out.
Gives you a quick break from that position too, right? Maybe that can help you with holding that. Man, Josh had to work hard to reattach in that situation, right? And you can see him kind of yo-yoing. I'm sure he's dealing with those crosswinds or the wind and trying to hold into that draft. I guess this is probably a good time for us to look over kind of at your performance, Dave, in terms of what you did in terms of power. On that first lap, it was about 14 minutes long, 14:16, and you did a normalized power of 289 and then your average power of 280. So really not a huge variance between the two. Certainly some, but not a whole lot. The interesting thing is you have a cadence of 98, which is actually pretty high for a lot of people that do time trials. Is that something that's like self-selected and you just...
Yeah, I tend to spin a lot more in the TT.
Yeah.
I think we've got the 40K coming up. I think last time I did the 40K, my average cadence was over 100, like 103 or something.
And looking at this, it looks like the majority of your time was spent thresholds, basically tempo to threshold, and very little time above that, right? You're trying to minimize that time, which makes sense. That's, like you said, Chad, over-unders, and you can see that here on this one. 17 seconds of coasting. So that's the first lap, and that was when you were together as a group. I guess we're looking at the second lap now, so kind of what's to come and what you're in the middle of right now. And it looks like the pace kind of dropped down slightly from there. Something interesting, though, that I see on this second lap, too, is that you look at the coasting time. Look at how little you coasted on the second lap compared to the first. Only 1 second, and that just shows probably because of having two teammates, right? Yeah, there's less time to recover, less of a draft.
Yeah, and I think on this second lap, I basically did almost the whole lap on the front.
Yeah.
And I had to hold back too, because we're not quite to the point where Josh told me, in that situation, it's okay, because I've been in that position too, where I'm suffering.
Let's say if you've done enough team time trials, you've probably run the gamut. You've been the guy who's having the best day and the guy who's having the worst day, and they are just night and day different.
Yeah. It looks like the poles now might be slightly longer, maybe between you two, and maybe skewed toward you being slightly longer.
I think here I told Josh. This is, I think, when I said you ride the hills because, I just told him you ride the hills because then he dictates his own speed on the climb and I won't blow him up.
Yeah, that's smart.
And then I think we may have mentioned this already, but in the case of a team time trial, the fittest guy, especially as the ride wanes on, is going to take the longer poles. You don't take stronger poles ever. All you do is beat people up when you take stronger poles, and everything just starts to come apart. But if you're the stronger guy, then you just sit out front longer and just do the work in the wind longer.
So that's a good point. And we're always super eager when we get to the front to really punch it. Are there certain things that you use to be able to make sure that it's like even pacing when you move to the front, that you don't throw it off too much?
The power meter is huge here because, maybe my threshold's 320 watts, but if I'm towing Josh and I'm doing 320 watts and it's killing him, then I back it off until he says that's good, and then maybe I have to ride at 290,
take a peek
280.
at the watts and see what you're up against.
So
and then speed too. I mean, the course terrain is going to dictate, or it's going to change the speed. But when you're on a flat section and things are, the wind hasn't changed, the direction hasn't changed, and you just take a peek at your speed when you're in the draft, and then when it's your turn to pull, you just hold that speed reasonably steady.
Yeah, so I mean, as that person moves out of the way, your wattage is going to increase because the draft is going away, but you don't necessarily, you don't want to do any extra.
You ramp the speed up, and the guy who's trying to get onto the back of that is going to have a heck of a time doing it. And again, it just destroys the cohesion amongst the riders.
Especially when you're down to two riders.
Yeah.
The strategy's different.
Here I can tell by the power numbers that Josh was really suffering because I'm on the front and I'm doing.
Sitting around 200.
Yeah, this is when he was having a hard time.
Yeah.
And it could just be,
and you're out of position.
Yeah,
right there.
I'm just cruising.
And that's because the pace is easy enough. You're probably taking advantage of the time to recover.
Yeah, and it's just easier to breathe right there.
Yeah,
and let Josh pull him up the hill or set the tempo up the hill, and then Dave knows he's probably going to ride the entirety of the rest of this lap in front. So we might as well save up now.
Yeah,
but it could be too that maybe he just, you could have a bad moment and then recover.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And then he can contribute later too. That's what you got to think about as well.
It looks like Josh is out of position here. It's probably slower on the climb, so he's probably weighing that, and he might be favoring recovery more than staying in that position, right? In this situation, he's going slow enough.
He's still doing big watts, though. He's doing
look at
400 and something watts.
Yeah, he's cooking, huh?
Yeah, and that's a good point, too, because over the course of this, I mean, even with two riders, you can have those low moments where you're just struggling, but you get into the draft or you get a little bit of a downhill or something, and you get just enough recovery to where you're back in the game.
Yeah, he's tongue out. He's cooking.
It was extremely hot. I definitely think that had something to do with, even during your warm-up. This, you're just
and he has the arrowhead, right? Non-vented.
Yeah, his is vented.
Or his is vented, but with tape on it. He tapes.
He tapes him over. So
so
he's sweating.
Yeah, so this is. So you look at it, and it's kind of. I think this is kind of smart by Josh to not be in the arrow position that long, or to be taking that time out of it. Oh, you saw his wide elbows kind of opening up his chest a bit. It was downhill and he was in the draft. It wasn't like he was having to work at that point. So you might as well take that time to recover. It's and especially as a group of two, when you're the person on the back, you can do those sort of things, and you aren't going to screw up anybody behind you, right?
Yeah. And this too. I mean, there's a ton of wind here still. You can see we're still echelon. The wind's kind of probably the most crosswind right here, where it's coming from right or left still. And it's just, we're doing 55 kilometers an hour. We're going fast. And that's another thing I always think about too. Power doesn't always mean speed. We use power meters to pace ourselves, but a lot of times on the course, I'll look at speed too. And compared to my watts, I'll be like, oh, I'm only doing 270 watts, but I'm doing 53 kilometers an hour. That's fast.
Yeah. So it's a good time to kind of take it easy or not just gut yourself to stay at that. Yeah, give yourself some time, especially when you're talking about going over a threshold, going under a threshold. Those little moments that you can recover, absolutely.
And there's
key.
a trade too. I mean, you're coming down a hill in this situation. It's a good time to get just a little bit of recovery in, because you can coast at 35 or soft pedal at 35, drill it for 3 miles an hour faster. When that what you gain from that extra 3 miles an hour faster will not outweigh what you gain by a little bit of rest, so that you can push hard over the remainder of the course.
So you're taking a really long pull, and that's letting Josh kind of recover. You're coming up to a turn here. Josh is, and you guys are just coasting in. Josh stayed in position on that one. But it's interesting to see. You can even see when you look at performance analytics, you can see that the changes that you had in between power from the first lap to the second lap. At second lap, you really spent a lot more time toward the front there. But once again, a team time trial, a lot of it is about keeping the team together just as much as, and I guess you always want to be aware of the numbers that you need, right? So you can shell off as many as needed and no more than that. In this situation, something that I see a lot of time trialists do is following the white line. It looks
I was going to say, another thing I usually do is that's a few free watts right there.
Yeah.
Just
depending. There's some of it that's like that laid down cloth that's quite tacky.
Oh, yeah.
And it's absolutely the wrong place to be.
Yeah.
But in the case of this course, that's the smoothest line.
So it's probably 3 watts, 4 watts, just right there.
So you're trying to stick to that to try to gain any little sort of efficiency. It looks like you're coming up on a spit-off rider.
Yeah, this is a rider. I think he's just on a road bike. You get a bunch of different teams doing this, some people on full time trial bikes and a mix of guys and girls on road bikes and TT bikes. So it kind of runs the gamut.
Yeah. Is this when you're riding in a position with I guess right close behind somebody on a TT bike? Is there anything at all? We talked a little bit about how you might do things differently, but in this case, right behind somebody, do you hang as close or do you drift? Do you notice yourself on the TT bike going
I think
back?
you go as close as you
can. As close as possible, yeah. And you just have to be comfortable with, first off, you got to trust that rider, and you're always looking ahead of them, so you don't know what the terrain's going to bring you. But you just have to be comfortable with scrubbing off speed by slipping out into the wind, maybe sitting up a little bit, but basically using the wind as your braking mechanism.
Yeah. I think another thing that's really important in a team time trial is, and I told Zach before we started, I said, no matter what, don't stop pedaling. And I didn't mean it as like the whole time just ride hard. But if you're on the front and you roll off and you just stop pedaling, that could cause an accident,
sorts of chaos,
cause chaos, cause people to get out of the aero position and hit their brakes. So you just back off the power as you're rolling back. You keep pedaling. You don't do anything sudden, I guess. Obviously, there's emergency situations where there's like a rock in the road or whatever, some glass. And
then I remember, so Dave and I have done a district team time trial with 2 other guys. And we decided that, in order to, because you can't really flick an elbow like you would when you're on road bars. So we would actually use just one little quick back pedal, I think, as we slipped off to the side.
Kick the knee out or something like that.
But just subtle little messaging that doesn't have to be verbal. So you can figure out other ways to communicate information to your teammates.
That's a clever way of doing it. Do you change if you were just focusing on team time trials, would you change anything about your bike setup? Would you go like less aggressive or more aggressive or maintain the same?
I don't think I'd change anything.
Yeah.
No, I think it's pretty much the same because honestly though too, this is probably if you're a road racer and a time trials, you're probably going to do team time trials the absolute least out of any of it.
Yeah. So it doesn't make sense to optimize for that.
Yeah. I mean, we have a few out here where we live, but the only other times I've done them is in like bigger stage races and overseas, never here. So
Josh just took a pole. He went to the front for a while after you did that very long pole. Then you're back in front now. I assume that you're still pacing. You're not going all out because you guys are getting closer to the finish, but you're still not going all out. You're pacing off of him.
I'm just
basically.
He wanted to do the turn, so I let him, and I think he started to feel a little bit better. But this is part of the course. There's a couple small rollers before you get up to that final overpass, and even that I know could just absolutely crack Josh if I went too fast. So, I'm trying to give him as much draft as I can, but I'm not very much draft, and just the weight difference, it's huge. It's crazy to see how much in my draft he's basically doing the same power as I am on the front.
Well, and it's unfortunate that they're down to 2 riders, because when it gets to a point where one of them's falling apart, then I mean, obviously it's up to Dave from this point forward. So he there's just not much assistance. I mean, this is almost like a 2-man break where he's breaking his brake mate rather than a team time trial.
Looking back, do you think that would have been better for you guys? I mean, the difference in ability was pretty strong, but do you think it would have been better to stick together as a group of 3, or do you think that this was the fastest way to get you across the line still?
I think that had I known, like, Zach only finished a couple minutes behind us.
Yeah.
So that to me tells me that he probably just had a bad moment and didn't want to say anything, or just felt he couldn't do it. But I think if just knowing that him riding in solo and he was only a couple, because our time was taken off Zach. It was like 31 minutes, even though we finished in like 29.
Right. Yeah. You guys thought that you might just be able to be scored just for yourselves, is why you went that way. Looks like Josh is picking up the watts.
Yeah, we're almost done. So it's like,
there he goes.
To go the same speed, he's doing like 50 watts more than me.
Yeah, look at that, huh? And then this is kind of like an uphill finish into this time trial. It's not super steep, but it's definitely substantial enough. And he's out of position in this case. Would you say it's best to stay in position?
I think we're going right. We're going the speed that's like right at that cusp. We're doing about 18 miles an hour.
He's digging too. I mean, the line is just up the road here.
Yeah.
So he's probably thinking I can get more power out, more acceleration at this slow speed, relative speed.
I mean, we do an individual time trial on this course, and when I do that, I never break position.
Yeah.
Never. But it's, it's how fast you're going into the hill. Like if you have a few more miles an hour, a couple kilometers an hour more, then you can stay down there. But
right. Yeah, that makes sense.
It was a tough day. It was super hot too. I mean, that just had to, on a bigger rider, the heat's going to be more of a factor.
Super hot, and shelling 2 of your 4 riders so early on makes for a hard day.
It's kind of interesting to see. I mean, team time trials, cycling is in many respects a team sport, and team time trials definitely so. But it's interesting to see how it can change a very steady state normal race, how it can change the tactic up. It's pretty cool stuff. Thanks, guys. I feel like we covered some interesting stuff on team time trials. Some main things that stick in my mind are putting the weaker rider first and challenging spots of the course in terms of like climbs. Another thing that really sticks out to me that you were saying is that if you feel stronger, you don't pull harder, you just make your pulls longer.
Longer pulls. Yeah, when the weaker riders are the riders who are fading get in front of you, and you see that average speed or the speed just tick down every time they do it, it's your day. You're the guy who's going to be doing most of the work.
And then the other thing that sticks out to me is communication, and then making sure that you're communicating as a group. So then when you do see something like that, you let them know. Just sit at the back for a while until you can recover, or you can say, "Hey, I need to go easier here." I feel like those 3 things can keep you together. So. And
one thing I would say about team time trials in general, they're probably one of the funnest things to do on a bike, in a bike race.
They're nightmarishly difficult, but they're actually pretty fun.
Yeah, if you have a good one, it's like super rewarding at the end because you went probably faster than you could ever go on your own on that course.
Yeah,
in some cases, quite a bit faster.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this one with team time trials. If you want to see anything more about or any other type of racing that you want us to cover, just let us know. Go into the comments below or share this video with other folks that might be interested with that. If you're interested in what we do here, what we saw with performance analytics, anything else with TrainerRoad, you can go to TrainerRoad.com and you can find more content, a lot of stuff just like this. Thanks, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.